Hey guys, tonight we slip into the dirt-packed square of a medieval town where the smells of roast meat, sweat, and something disturbingly barnyardy hang thick in the air. Chickens scurry underfoot, children with toothless grins weave through the crowd, and the noise swells with anticipation. You're not at a market or a church service. You're here for the show. A crowd presses in toward a makeshift arena, wooden posts lashed together with rope, hay trampled flat. In the center, a huge brown bear, chained at the neck, paces anxiously. Across from it, handlers lead in a pack of snarling dogs. This, my friend, is your afternoon entertainment. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're tuning in from somewhere unusual, let me know in the comments. Drop your location and what time it is for you. I love seeing where in the world we're falling asleep together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You squint as the sun catches on the bear's heavy iron collar. Someone beats a drum. The first dog is released. It lunges, snapping at the bear's legs. The bear swipes. It's not a dance so much as a grim, bloody ballet. The crowd roars approval. You grimace, but don't look away. This is bear baiting, and it's one of the most popular public pastimes across medieval Europe. From England to the Holy Roman Empire, arenas were erected just for this bloody spectacle, attended by both peasants and royalty. Henry VIII had a bear garden built next to his palace, because what says royal leisure like animal violence on demand? Of course, bear baiting wasn't limited to bears. Bulls, apes, and even lions occasionally featured in these twisted matches. But bears had that special appeal. Big, slow-moving, yet terrifyingly strong. The longer a bear survived, the more famous it became. Some had nicknames and followings, like medieval celebrity fighters. And yes, gambling was part of the fun. You could bet on how many dogs would die before the bear went down, or whether the animal would last until sunset. Sometimes, just to spice things up, handlers would drug the bear, make it slow and woozy, or starve the dogs to make them more aggressive. Think of it as the medieval version of a fight night with no rules and a lot of blood. And it was a family event. Parents brought their kids. Vendors hawked roasted nuts and cider. A noblewoman in a velvet hood might applaud from a private balcony while a tanner's apprentice wipes dog blood from his boots below. Historians still argue whether these spectacles had a ritualistic or purely recreational origin. Some say bear baiting descended from older pagan rites of animal sacrifice and symbolic struggle. Others insist it was just people being people, gruesome and bored. Either way, by the 13th century, entire guilds specialized in training and managing baiting animals. It was an economy. Of course, sometimes things went off script. In 1253, a bear broke its chain in a London pit and rampaged through the crowd, mauling several spectators before it was put down. The response? Build sturdier chains. The fun must go on. And if you weren't into bears, don't worry. There was cockfighting, dog fights, and even monkey-on-horse jousting. Yes, Someone thought it was a good idea to teach monkeys to ride dogs dressed like knights. You can't make this stuff up. It was hilarious, until the monkey panicked and bit someone. Then it was still hilarious, but with more screaming. In some towns, these blood sports were used to celebrate festivals or royal births. A new prince born. Toss a dozen dogs into the pit with a starving wolf and see who walks out. Medieval party planning at its finest. These events weren't fringe. They were civic centerpieces. Town criers announced match times, and local leaders often sponsored the shows, proudly. But there were critics. Some church leaders condemned the practice as sinful cruelty. Not out of concern for animals necessarily. It was more that the crowd got too rowdy. One cleric complained that people skipped mass for bear fights and returned with devilish mirth and soiled garments. Priorities, right? By the late medieval period, the most successful bear pits became tourist destinations. You might travel half a day by cart to see a famous bear who once killed 6 mastiffs in a single fight. Merchants sold tokens shaped like bears. Minstrels sang ballads about Blunt Ear the dog slayer. Some baiting arenas even issued crude entry tickets carved into bits of wood. If all this makes you a little queasy, that's fair. But don't forget, back then, life was brutal and short. Work was endless, joy was rare, and death was never far. Watching a bear rip through a dozen hounds, that was escapism. In its own bizarre way, it made people feel alive, or at least distracted. So as the crowd cheers and coins change hands, you back away from the pit, the noise still ringing in your ears. You've survived your first taste of medieval fun, and you haven't even gotten to the fake bishops, goat lawyers, or the competitive lice hunting. Stick around. The bear pit fades behind you, but the noise doesn't. That same wild energy hums in the streets tonight, because something even more absurd is coming. You follow a crowd toward the cathedral of all places. But don't worry, you're not about to get preached at. Not really. The doors swing open and a procession emerges. A man in full bishop's regalia, staggering just slightly, crowned in what appears to be a cabbage. Behind him trails a rowdy choir of drunk townsfolk in mismatched robes. One juggles eggs, another sings a hymn backward. One poor soul is trying to ride a donkey inside out. Welcome to the Feast of Fools, a festival so chaotic, so utterly upside down, that even the church couldn't quite decide whether to ban it or join in. It's sometime around New Year's or Epiphany, depending on the town, and for one glorious day, the rules of order are flipped. Peasants dress as priests, stable boys become bishops. A lord of misrule is elected, often a man known for poor decision-making and excellent drinking stamina. He's handed mock authority over the revels, including the right to issue ridiculous decrees like everyone must hop on one foot until midnight or turnips are currency now. You might be chosen as the Archbishop of Nonsense. You don a mitre made of bread crusts, hold a sausage like a scepter, and bless chickens. People cheer. You have no idea what you're doing. It's glorious. The core idea is simple. Total reversal. The Feast of Fools wasn't just silly. Historians still argue whether it was a form of social protest, religious catharsis, or just a convenient excuse to get day drunk while insulting clergy. Some scholars trace it to Roman Saturnalia, that wild week where slaves and masters switched roles. Others think it grew from Christian traditions that encouraged humility through parody. Either way, medieval towns embraced the nonsense with unsettling enthusiasm. You shuffle into the cathedral again, now transformed into a theater of absurdity. The choir bursts into song, off-key and off-color. Incense burners are swinging, not with smoke, but with cheese rinds. A pretend mass is led by the fool bishop, who chants exaggerated Latin phrases while goats bleat outside. People collapse with laughter. A monk at the back grins despite himself. Somewhere, someone lets off a fart and receives thunderous applause. One chronicler in 15th century Paris reported that participants danced on the altar and wore animal masks during the feast. Others mention mock sermons where the priest preached about the virtues of ale and flatulence. Predictably, church authorities were not thrilled. Synods repeatedly issued decrees condemning the festival, calling it blasphemous, indecent, and just plain dumb. But the thing is, it wouldn't stop. Like trying to ban birthdays or snowball fights, it just kept coming back. Too fun to die. In some cities, local rulers even supported the feast unofficially. It gave people a pressure valve. Let them mock their betters, pretend for one night they weren't bound by taxes, hunger, or strict moral codes. The next day, everyone sobered up, the cabbage crown came off, and life returned to its usual gray. But for that one day, pure chaotic glee. Even high nobility sometimes joined in. There's a blurry line between making fun of bishops and being one who doesn't mind the occasional pie to the face. One archbishop in Cologne reportedly laughed heartily while being parodied in goat hair robes. Some abbots tried to tame the feast by formalizing parts of it, giving out official misrule titles, setting curfews, and assigning roles. You know, ruin it slightly with structure, like medieval HR. Still, the Feast of Fools persisted until the Reformation, when many Protestant reformers cracked down hard on such unorthodox revelry. The joke, apparently, had gone on too long, and yet echoes of it survive even now. Mardi Gras, Carnival, April Fools, they all carry the same spark of mischief, that ancient primal urge to laugh at power, to throw logic out the window, and to cover a donkey in gold leaf and call it His Grace. So you stagger away from the revels, dizzy from the incense and laughter, your face sore from smiling. Your tunic smells like beer and onion pudding. In your hand, a certificate declaring you most holy turnip vicar of the West District. You'll treasure it always. You've barely recovered from your brief, glorious reign as the holy turnip vicar when something peculiar catches your eye in the town square. A small platform has been set up, ringed by solemn-looking men in cloaks. A bell tolls once. You assume it's some sort of religious hearing, but then you notice the accused. It's a pig. A very large, very nervous-looking pig, tethered by a rope and flanked by armed guards. One of the cloaked men, clearly a notary, clears his throat and begins to read the charges. This swine stands accused of trampling a child to death on the feast of St. Martin. A gasp ripples through the crowd. You blink. Yes, the pig is on trial. Welcome to one of medieval Europe's strangest forms of public engagement: animal trials. And they were exactly what they sound like: legal proceedings, complete with judges, lawyers, and witnesses, held against animals. Real trials, real punishments. This wasn't rare or symbolic. Over several centuries, hundreds of cases were recorded in which pigs, goats, horses, dogs, and even insects were formally tried for crimes ranging from theft and assault to heresy and murder. Some trials took place in civil courts, others in ecclesiastical ones, and both followed elaborate procedure. Historians still argue whether these trials were sincere attempts at justice or theatrical morality plays meant to reinforce divine order. But whatever the deeper reasoning, the execution was deadly serious. Literally. That pig, if convicted, it could be hanged. Yes, hanged, in public, by an official executioner. There are records of pigs being dressed in human clothes before sentencing, possibly to emphasize their personhood under trial. In 1386, one sow in Falaise, France, was sentenced to death for attacking a baby, and was dressed in a waistcoat and trousers before its very grim hanging. You shift uncomfortably as the pig's defense attorney, a real one, often a cleric, begins his argument. He cites precedent, claims the pig was provoked, perhaps even bewitched. He gestures to the animal's good behavior in court as proof of its gentle nature. The judge frowns thoughtfully. Meanwhile, the crowd is enthralled. This is excellent theater, better than bear baiting, cleaner than the Feast of Fools, and apparently sanctioned by both God and king. It wasn't just pigs. In 1519, a rooster was tried and executed in Basel for laying an egg, an act considered unnatural and possibly demonic. That same century, a colony of weevils was summoned to court for destroying crops. The prosecution demanded their excommunication. The weevils failed to appear and were convicted in absentia. I mean, they were weevils. Sometimes the courts showed surprising mercy. In one case, rats accused of devouring barley failed to show up for trial, but the defense successfully argued they hadn't received proper notice. The court agreed. No death sentence, just a strongly worded ecclesiastical warning. These proceedings served a broader purpose than just bizarre entertainment. They reinforced a cosmic sense of order. Everything had a place, even animals, and breaking that order had consequences. Whether you were a peasant or a pig, wrongdoing invited judgment. Still, it's hard not to smirk as a town crier announces that the beetles of Lower Lorraine are hereby condemned and shall depart the cabbage fields within 6 days or face divine retribution. Naturally, some trials became so elaborate they turned into full-day festivals. Vendors would sell food, musicians played, and artists sketched scenes for later record. A good pig trial was something to talk about for weeks. Scholars continued to debate how seriously people took these events. Were they dead serious rituals of spiritual symbolism, or tongue-in-cheek traditions halfway between justice and pantomime? The answer, as usual, is probably both. Like much of medieval life, the absurd and the sacred lived comfortably side by side. You squint at the pig on the stand. It's chewing on a tuft of hay, utterly unaware of its legal peril. The judge confers with the jury. You hear murmuring, "The pig will be spared. Instead, it will be exiled from the town and its owner fined." The crowd groans in disappointment, then disperses in search of something stronger to drink. And just like that, justice is served. As you wander away from the square, still shaking your head, you notice a child playing executioner with a stuffed goose and a shoelace. You don't know whether to laugh or be deeply unsettled. But one thing's for sure. Medieval people didn't wait for Netflix to get weird. They brought the courtroom to the barnyard, made goats into felons, and genuinely asked, "What is justice when your main witness oinks?" By now, your medieval brain is thoroughly scrambled. Pig trials, cabbage bishops, and chained bear duels have lowered your expectations of reality. But tonight, things are about to get twitchy. You're walking through a quiet town when you hear it. The distant thump of drums, strange metallic rhythms, and wait, chanting? You round the corner to see a crowd of villagers gathered in a square, not angry or amused, but terrified. In the middle, a young woman is dancing, wildly, not like court dancing or tavern jigs, but flailing, arms jerking, feet stomping, hair flying as if possessed. Then a second person joins, then a third. No music now, just panting and gasps and horrified whispers. You've stumbled into a dance plague. Yes, that was a thing, and not just once. Throughout the late Middle Ages, especially during the 14th to 16th centuries, Europe experienced mysterious outbreaks of what's now referred to as dancing mania. Entire groups of people, sometimes hundreds, would begin dancing uncontrollably, often for days, sometimes weeks. They couldn't stop. They collapsed from exhaustion, broke bones, even died. In 1518, the most famous case occurred in Strasbourg, where a woman named Frau Trophea began dancing in the street. After a week, dozens had joined. By the end of the month, nearly 400 people were involved. City officials were so baffled they hired musicians to help them dance it out. The result? More dancers, more injuries. Some dropped dead mid-spin. Historians still argue what caused it. Some blame ergot poisoning, a hallucinogenic mold on rye bread. Others suggest mass hysteria triggered by stress, famine, or religious fear. After all, this was a time when everyone lived on the brink of starvation, plague, and salvation. Maybe they cracked. Or maybe something more mystical was at play. Of course, medieval folks had their own theories. Many believed the afflicted had been cursed, possibly by Saint Vitus, a martyr known for his dramatic death throes. That's why one name stuck, Saint Vitus's dance. Some tried to exorcise the dancers, others marched them to shrines, hoping a holy pilgrimage would shake the madness loose. Spoiler, it usually didn't. You stand at the edge of the square as the dancers whirl by, sweat flying, eyes wild. A man collapses in front of you, sobbing and kicking as if his limbs have minds of their own. No one can help. Children peek from windows. Clerics mutter prayers. And still, the dancing continues. It wasn't always involuntary, though. Sometimes dancing was just strange. Like the flagellant parades, where groups marched through towns whipping themselves in rhythm, singing dirges and occasionally breaking into ecstatic dances of pain and repentance, or the bone dances in plague-hit regions, where villagers dressed as skeletons and capered in graveyards to mock death, or maybe to make peace with it. And then there were the possession festivals. Yes, those were real too. In certain parts of Germany and France, people would intentionally work themselves into ecstatic trances, often believing themselves possessed by spirits or saints. They would shout in tongues, leap, twist, and weep. Sometimes it was considered pious, sometimes hilarious, sometimes terrifying. In a village near Cologne, one chronicler reported a boy who believed he was a rooster, flapping his arms and crowing for 3 days. The town wasn't even alarmed. They fed him grain and waited it out. To the modern mind, all of this sounds like a bizarre mix of mental illness, ritual, and maybe psychedelic bread. But to medieval folk, it was simply another mystery in a world full of them. You couldn't always explain why someone danced until they collapsed. You just prayed it didn't happen to you. And yet, strangely, it brought people together. Towns built shrines afterward. Communities rallied around afflicted families. Some even commemorated the dance outbreaks with festivals and plays. One town in Belgium still reenacts its historic dance mania every summer, though now with water bottles and medics. So you linger at the edge of the square as the dancers begin to slow, dropping one by one. The music has faded. The sun is rising. A priest steps forward with a damp rag and blesses a woman's forehead. Her eyes flutter. She sleeps. Others collapse beside her. The crowd exhales. You turn away, legs aching sympathetically, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or stretch. Medieval fun, it turns out, wasn't always voluntary. Sometimes it just grabbed you by the ankles and wouldn't let go. You've survived the plague of involuntary footwork, but don't relax just yet. As you wander into the quieter lanes of a medieval city, narrow, winding, vaguely damp, you catch a whiff of something dreadful. No, not death. Worse. Human waste. That's when a clay pot sails out of a window above you and splat, lands inches from your feet. Congratulations. You've entered the highly underrated world of chamber pot games. This is not a metaphor. In much of medieval Europe, particularly in cramped cities like Paris or York, indoor plumbing was a fantasy more distant than dragons. People relieved themselves into chamber pots, simple ceramic or wooden bowls, and then, when full, well, they dumped them. Right out the window, into the street. Sometimes with a shouted warning, "Garde low! Watch out for the water!" Sometimes not. You sidestep the steaming mess and glance up. No apology. Just a closed shutter. That's part of the fun. Now, imagine what people did with this situation. Did they scowl and fume? No. They turned it into games. There's sparse but suggestive evidence that some young troublemakers turned chamber pot tossing into a kind of sport. Not in formal tournaments, we hope, but in spontaneous street contests. Targets? Sometimes rats. Sometimes unfortunate rivals. Sometimes simply the satisfaction of a satisfying splat on a stranger's hood. Historians still argue whether these were deliberate entertainments or just side effects of a crude world. But the anecdotal records suggest a certain mischief. In some tavern districts, boys would gather to see who could launch waste the furthest. In others, townsfolk placed bets on whether a certain upstairs window would strike a passing nobleman. It wasn't just throwing either. Some cities staged public cleansing races where apprentices had to dodge refuse while delivering goods. If you made it to the guild hall without being hit, you were rewarded with a pint and a towel. If not, well, no one rides home on the clean cart. One Parisian document even records a legal complaint about a baker who repeatedly dumped waste near his competitor's oven. That's not mischief, that's medieval marketing sabotage. And let's not forget gong farmers, the brave, often well-paid souls who scooped waste from cesspits and privy vaults. It wasn't a game for them, but it was the stuff of grim fascination for the rest of society. Children sometimes followed them like they were minor celebrities. One even had a song, Gong Man, brave with the nose, through tunnels he shovels where nobody goes. Of course, not everyone found it funny. The growing middle class eventually demanded sanitation reform, and cities like London began enforcing curfews on dumping hours. Some even installed fines. Did that stop the fun? Not entirely. Because if there's one thing medieval people excelled at, it was finding joy in the disgusting. But chamber pot antics weren't limited to the streets. In private homes, guests might find themselves caught in the middle of toilet humor of the literal kind. Some nobles commissioned prank pots with false bottoms or surprise leaks. Others used slop as a passive-aggressive statement. A guest who overstayed their welcome might wake up to find their boots compromised. Even high-status guests weren't immune. A French noble once wrote that he declined a second visit to a particular castle because the Duke had a fondness for throwing things from balconies, ambiguous but strongly implied to be liquid-based. There were also chamber pot wagers. In taverns, a drunk might boast he could aim his pot from the top floor into a specific barrel below. Others would bet on who could fill theirs the fastest after a night of cabbage stew and ale, a contest both competitive and deeply regrettable. Some scholars argue that these grotesque entertainments were rooted in older fertility rites, associating waste with rebirth, decay with the cycle of life. But others just shake their heads and say, people were bored and had no Netflix. Either way, there's something weirdly human about it all. A society surrounded by hardship and dirt choosing to laugh at the one thing everyone does. Sure, it's crude, but in a world of plagues, poverty, and early mortality, there's something kind of beautiful about turning even that into a punchline. You tiptoe your way out of the alley, shoes only slightly soiled, dodging another ceramic missile with expert timing. Someone claps from a nearby doorway. You take a bow. You've played the game. You've survived the splash zone. You wipe your shoes on the nearest patch of relatively dry moss and swear you'll never look at a flower pot the same way again. But just when you think the medieval entertainment menu can't possibly get darker, you hear singing, sweet, cheerful singing. And beneath it, a wooden platform, ropes, a scaffold. You blink. Is this a concert? Nope. It's an execution. And you're not alone. A crowd is already forming. Mothers, children, vendors, lovers sharing meat pies. This isn't a grim, solemn moment. It's Thursday fun. And that gallows, that's the main stage. Public executions in the Middle Ages were more than punishment. They were events. Think of them as equal parts justice, deterrent, and brutally festive entertainment. You'd plan for it the way you might plan for a fair or a feast day. Bake extra bread, get up early, stake out a good spot. The condemned is wheeled out on a cart, already half saint and half spectacle. People cheer or jeer depending on the crime. Some towns even provided a platform for musicians to perform as a sort of farewell concert, a grim curtain call as the rope was readied. In England, executions at Tyburn drew thousands. In Florence, a good hanging could upstage a local tournament. Vendors moved through the crowd selling candied nuts, bread rolls, and ale. Children clambered onto rooftops for better views. Romantic couples huddled together for warmth and drama. It's horrifying. It's surreal. But to the medieval mind, it was just another chapter in the cycle of life and death. And the crowd didn't just watch. They participated. People might throw stones, chant final prayers, or whisper forgiveness. In some cases, the executioner would hold up the severed head like a prize. A lucky child might be tossed a bloody handkerchief, believed to hold healing power. Yes, really. Historians still argue whether the audience came primarily for punishment or performance. Some say it was civic duty, to witness justice done. Others point to the carnival atmosphere, where morality blurred with morbid curiosity. After all, who buys meat pies to watch a man hang? But there was also variety in the type of execution. Hanging was common, but not always the most popular. For special occasions or high-profile criminals, you might see burning, beheading, or even drawing and quartering. Each came with its own rituals. A good beheading was expected to be swift and clean. A bad one? Well, let's just say the crowd had opinions. Some condemned individuals became folk heroes. When a woman accused of theft in Rouen sang a final ballad before her hanging, the crowd joined in. Her song lived on in taverns for years. Execution Day wasn't just about ending a life, it was about imprinting a story. And the executioners? They were stars in their own right. Feared, yes, but also respected. Many had signature moves. Some wore colorful hoods or carried elaborately carved axes. A good executioner might be paid extra to make it quick. A really good one might be tipped afterward by the family of the deceased. Some towns turned executions into half-day festivals. After the deed was done, a parade might follow. Games would be played. A puppet reenactment was even staged once in Germany to explain the lessons of the crime to children, and sometimes the condemned themselves got involved. In one record, a man sentenced to hanging requested to perform a comedy monologue from the scaffold. The crowd loved it. He was still hanged, but people said it was the funniest execution in living memory. Did everyone enjoy this? Of course not. Some wept, some looked away, some refused to attend, but there was pressure to show up, to be seen. Because in a world without newspapers or cameras, the spectacle of punishment was how you internalized morality. It was how power reminded you it could end you. You inch away as the execution begins. Quick, quiet, almost merciful compared to the build-up. The crowd claps politely. A woman nearby mutters, "Well, at least he didn't scream." Then she offers you a honeyed oatcake. You take it, because that's how it goes here. One moment, a man dies. The next, someone sells roasted hazelnuts. Fun, justice, community horror, and a pinch of theater, all tangled up under the same wide sky. You crunch the last of your oatcake and wander down a quieter path, hoping for a break from blood and bodily fluids. What you find is oddly soothing. A group of townsfolk sits in a circle outside a cottage, picking at each other's hair. You pause. assuming someone's been infested, and brace for screams. But no, they're chatting, laughing. One man proudly holds up what looks like a flattened tick between his fingernails, displaying it like a gem. Another offers a friendly wager. I bet I get 5 fleas before you get 3. Yes. You've stumbled into a medieval grooming duel. It's not just hygiene, it's recreation. And yes, there's a scoring system. Welcome to the intimate and surprisingly competitive world of lice battles, naiad picking contests, and social grooming, an ancient pastime where personal care doubled as leisure, bonding, and entertainment. In a time when hot water was a luxury and soap was basically lard with ambition, everyone had lice, and fleas, and probably mites. But rather than despair, people got creative. Picking bugs off yourself was tedious. But picking them off each other? That could be a whole afternoon. Some households had weekly delousing sessions that doubled as family bonding. Friends gathered around fires or in sunlit yards, taking turns inspecting each other's scalps and sleeves. This wasn't just tolerated, it was expected. In fact, failing to participate might mark you as antisocial or unhygienic, ironically. There are medieval texts, yes, actual literature, that mention lovers plucking lice from one another as an act of tenderness. One troubadour poem from 13th century France swoons over a lady whose fingers gracefully searched my collar for foes most vile. You can't make this up. Historians still argue whether lice contests, counting who collected more, were real games or exaggerated anecdotes. But enough mentions survive to suggest it wasn't uncommon. Monks sometimes turned lice catching into informal challenges. The loser might owe a chore or a crust of bread. The winner? Bragging rights and a very itchy prize. In taverns, idle patrons would flick fleas into candle flames and bet on who's popped first. This was not just tolerated, it was hilarious. A sort of tavern Olympics for the insect afflicted. Some towns even had folk remedies that bordered on performance. One German village had a spring tradition where children chased each other with live lice on sticks, flinging them into a communal bowl to banish winter spirits. Charming and horrifying. But let's not pretend it was only fun. This grooming pastime also served a real function. Lice carried disease. Fleas could spread plague. In a society lacking antibiotics, your best defense was sharp eyes and fingernails. Turning it into a game made the work bearable. Turning it into social bonding made it sustainable. And then there were the flea circuses. No, not the Victorian kind with tiny trampolines. These were raw and real. People claimed to train fleas to race across tables. Others simply bet on whose flea would escape a circle drawn in chalk. Whether these were real feats of insect manipulation or drunken hallucinations, they were talked about with pride. Meanwhile, back at the cottage, you're being invited to join. An elderly woman pats the grass beside her and offers you a wooden comb. You sit, because what else can you do? And as she gently lifts your hair and mutters something about red ones being feistier, you find yourself relaxing. It's oddly pleasant. The breeze is warm, the grass soft, and everyone's chuckling over who found the fattest bug. Someone even sings a rhyme. Catch a louse, flick it thrice, curse its mother, squash it nice. What started as a grotesque necessity has become a moment of peace, a shared ritual in a world that otherwise offers few. For a people constantly brushing up against hardship, famine, and death, this is control, comfort, connection. You glance at the tiny pile of victims near your feet and realize you're winning. Someone claps. You bow. You, dear friend, have officially become the Louse Lord of the lower village. Congratulations. The sun's low now, casting long shadows across the cobbled streets. After your hard-earned title of Louse Lord, you figured the rest of the evening might be restful. But then you hear it, shouting from the chapel. Not hymns, not prayers, arguments, and laughter. You creep in through the heavy oak door and spot the source of chaos. Sunday service has turned into a full-blown spectator sport. Welcome to the unexpected world of sermon heckling and pew races. Yes, even worship had its rowdy side. Not every medieval church was a silent sanctuary. In many towns, especially where clergy and congregation knew each other too well, Mass could feel more like a tavern than a temple. Children chased each other down the aisles. Dogs wandered in. One monk in Yorkshire reported a goose walking across the altar mid-service to general amusement. Another chronicler complained that parishioners brought snacks and chewed loudly during prayers. But the real entertainment? The heckling. If your local priest was long-winded, inconsistent, or just plain boring, you let him know. In some parishes, people groaned when the sermon ran long. Others shouted jokes or tossed nutshells. One famously unpopular deacon in Lincolnshire was bombarded with turnips after preaching the same passage 3 weeks in a row. Historians still argue whether these disruptions were tolerated tradition or signs of poor religious discipline. Some scholars believe communities saw church as not just a spiritual center, but a civic gathering space. Part marketplace, part meeting hall, part stage. People weren't just passive listeners. They were participants, and sometimes critics. Of course, some priests gave as good as they got. One vicar in Kent reportedly carried a stick and wasn't afraid to use it mid-sermon. Others cracked jokes themselves to keep order. A clever pun could win over a restless crowd better than a rebuke. Then there were the pew races. In churches with long central aisles and loose seating, it became something of a dare, especially among children and bored apprentices, to sprint from one end to the other without being caught. The stakes? Bragging rights and possibly a good clout on the ear. Some older parishioners played along too. In one recorded case, 2 rival grandmothers claimed pews by racing with walking sticks before the Sunday bell. It caused such disruption that the church council had to install a rope line down the center aisle to stop competitive devotions. And we haven't even gotten to the pageantry. On feast days, church services became borderline carnivals. Parishioners in costume acted out biblical scenes, sometimes with more creativity than theology. One Palm Sunday, play featured a cardboard donkey that collapsed mid-parade. The crowd roared. Someone gave it last rites. Then there's the matter of hired mourners. At funerals, it wasn't unusual to bring in professional wailers to cry convincingly. Some got so into their roles they fainted dramatically, stole food from the wake, or fell into the grave accidentally. One woman in Bristol built such a reputation for theatrical sobbing that she was booked months in advance. But lest you think medieval folks had no respect for the sacred, remember this: they cared enough to attend, to participate, to laugh, groan, and argue. In an age before theater was common, the church was your stage, your soapbox, your social network. Sure, it got rowdy, but it was theirs, and not every service was chaos. During crises, plague outbreaks, droughts, wars, the mood would shift. The same people who heckled last week might now kneel silently, eyes shut, hands trembling. The laughter faded, the rituals deepened, the faith held. But tonight, it's just another sleepy Sunday. Someone's heckling the vicar's Latin. A boy is crawling under benches looking for a dropped apple. You sit near the back and watch as 3 women try to out-sing each other in the final hymn. One hits a note so shrill it sets off a dog. You smile. You don't remember the sermon, but you'll remember the moment, the candlelight, the murmured prayers, the jokes, the off-key hymns, all of it part of the strange, vivid joy of living in a time when even religion couldn't help but be a little weird. The church service ends with a blessedly off-key amen, and you slip out into the cool evening air. You've seen enough for one day: animal trials, flea games, mid-sermon turnip throwing. But one last sound draws you in: laughter, real laughter. You follow it to the edge of the manor, where torchlight flickers through arched windows. Inside, the Lord and his guests recline on cushions, wine goblets in hand, faces flushed from drink and mirth. At the center of it all, dancing across the tiles, is a man in motley, bright patchwork clothes, floppy hat with bells, and a grin so wide it might be stitched on. This is no fool. This is a jester. And in the brutal funhouse mirror of medieval life, jesters were the strangest form of entertainment of all. Truth-tellers in disguise, clowns with daggers behind their jokes, entertainers who mocked the king and kept their heads. Most of the time, you ease closer as the jester mimics the Lord's pompous walk. The room explodes with laughter. Even the Lord chuckles, though he tosses a grape with just a little more force than necessary. Still, the jester catches it with his teeth and bows low, jingles ringing. Court jesters weren't just goofballs, they were sharp, fast, and weirdly powerful. In a world rigidly structured by class, religion, and unspoken taboos, they alone could say the unsayable. They poked fun at the powerful whispered truths wrapped in riddles and made kings laugh at themselves, or else. Historians still argue whether jesters held true political sway or were merely tolerated buffoons. Some believe they influenced court decisions. Others say they were glorified pets. The truth likely varies. Some were masters of satire, others professional farters. Literally. One jester, Roland the Farter, earned land in Suffolk for his annual performance. One jump, one whistle, and one fart. Iconic. You catch a glimpse of another jester trick, balancing a goose on his head while reciting scandalous poetry. The crowd roars. It's absurd. It's wonderful. And it's oddly high stakes, because jesters could be punished. The line between wit and offense was thin, especially after wine. One tale tells of a jester who mocked the queen's embroidery. He was found the next morning locked in a privy. Another slipped up during a war council and ended up in chains for a week. Still, they persisted, because laughter was currency and jesters were rich in it. Many weren't nobles or even townsfolk. Some were born into poverty, some had disabilities, some were outsiders who found protection in entertainment. And in courts from France to Poland, they were often multilingual, educated, even musical. Their performances ranged from slapstick to philosophical parables, and they weren't confined to palaces. Traveling jesters roamed villages, taverns, and fairs, offering riddles, puppetry, and songs laced with innuendo. They were human TikToks, funny, fast, slightly inappropriate, and dangerously addictive. One could insult your mother and charm your daughter in the same breath. The room you're peering into dims a little. The jester has changed tone now. He tells a joke about death, softly, a whisper of melancholy. It makes the Lord pause just briefly before raising his goblet and declaring it the finest jest of the night. That's the magic of the jester. Behind the painted grin is a mirror. Cracked, yes, but honest. In a world where peasants died of famine and nobles died of gout, jesters died laughing. You wander back into the courtyard, the laughter fading behind you, replaced by the whispering hush of night. The torchlight blurs into stars. And now, slowly, softly, we begin to wind down. The dirt path crunches gently beneath your boots as you walk, the air crisp and cool against your skin. Somewhere nearby, a nightingale calls, a rare moment of beauty in a world that so often stank of cabbage and risk. You pause beneath the tree, the leaves barely stirring, and finally exhale. Today you've seen strange things. People cheering for dog-fighting bears, peasants blessing chickens in stolen bishop hats, dancing till collapse, tossing waste for fun, swapping lice like playing cards, laughing at death, laughing through it. And now, the noise is behind you. Ahead, there's only stillness. Your eyes begin to close, your muscles soften, your breath deepens. No more bear pits, no more pig trials, no more farting troubadours with land grants. Just rest. You're safe now, tucked inside a world that has gone quiet. The fire crackles, the shutters close. Sleep settles over you like a woolen cloak, scratchy, a little dusty, but warm. Tomorrow the bells may ring again. But tonight, the only sound that matters is your own slow heartbeat and the gentle hush of history tucking you in.